Hi, I'm Samantha Swick, Chief Marketing Officer of the Americas for Inspira, and welcome to Exampertise. In this podcast series, we will be speaking with industry experts who will share their knowledge on the assessment challenges institutions and students are facing, with the thought leaders who are passionate about the digital learning evolution that is occurring, and with Inspira leadership, who are at the forefront of creating digital exam experiences that are shaping the learning environment, with each digital exam authored, delivered, monitored, and graded. So join us as we explore how to modernize the digital exam experience with Exampertise. Hello, thank you for joining us today. I have Dr. Natasha Jankowski, who is a higher education and assessment expert and the former executive director of the National Institute for Learning Outcomes and Assessment, with me today on today's episode. So I'm going to quickly hand it over to Natasha to introduce herself and give us a little bit about her background, but she does come to us today as a co-author of several books, including Using Evidence of Student Learning to Improve Higher Education, Degrees That Matter, Moving Higher Education to a Learning System Paradigm, and I think something that's super specific to our conversation today, she was co-author as well on Reframing Assessment to Center Equality, Theories, Models, and Practices, equity, theories, models, and practices. So Natasha, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of insight into your background and share with us a little bit about your experiences.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me to have a dialogue on this. I was realizing as you were talking that I need shorter book titles on these. It's like the most academic thing to do, to have one title and then a colon and a whole second title. So it's, when you put them all together, it's a lot. So my background in assessment majority comes from my time spent at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, or NILOA, which is a research to resource institute. So basically it looks at how are institutions in the United States going about assessing student learning at a college level, mostly undergraduate focus, and then what's working and for whom. And most of the assessment of student learning is generally focused on the practice, like tell me what I need to do, what do I need to have in place, what are these processes? And my background and interest is not a measurement one. It's not really a process piece one either. My background's actually in philosophy. And so for me, it's more questions of, well, what are we doing and why? And is this what we should be doing? And what are the implications for this? And what are all these different pieces and elements we need to think about as we engage in our practice of assessment? So there's a ton of open resources that are available on the NILOA website. But none of them are really like follow these steps to do it. It's all, what do we need to be thinking about in making sure that what we're doing in our work is advancing us towards learning and doing it in ways that meet our students where they are and our faculty and our staff. So very excited to bring the philosophy piece to assessing student learning, which is often set aside.
Well, I love a curious mind, and I think to be that closely related to the philosophy subject matter, you have to be naturally curious. So I can totally appreciate that, and love that path has led you to helping higher education really transform what they're interested in doing from a goals perspective, because I think that philosophy certainly plays a very large role in shaping that path to achieving those goals. So if you don't mind, we're going to start and jump right in. As institutions continue to shape their digital learning transformation strategies, can you share with us some areas that institutions should consider reviewing to further their teaching and learning strategies?
Yes, and I think some of this is hard because often institutions, when they come into technology and they're thinking about, what do we need for learning, they start with, I have this budget, so I need something that falls in this cost. And I was told, we have a committee that we're looking for this type of solution. And so they jump into kind of navigating the market and figuring out, what falls within those option spaces. And it's the same thing we do in assessment, where we jump to the what report do we need and who needs it? And now let's get this stuff together and move, instead of backing up and starting with, well, what problem are we really trying to solve for? What makes sense for our institution and where we are and what we value about our student experience? And where is our faculty and staff in their interest and willingness to engage with some of these? And thinking about too where, our faculty and staff are coming out of a big jump to online and an increased engagement with technology, and just the rate at which technology moves in advancing and changing and doing all these things. It is not the same level and speed at which our faculty and staff move with their trust technology or their comfort level with technology. And so there can be options that are available out there that we're like, oh, maybe next year, like, what do I need to do to get us set up to be successful? So when I think about what do we need to consider, I like to think about 3 buckets. And one is institutional considerations, another is pedagogical considerations, and then the last one is our student learning pieces. And those sort of fall into implementation, and not often, I would say, and not so much on the front end of thinking about, is this a good solution for the problem that we have? Is this a tech problem solution, or is this a people issue? Because some things were like, maybe this will solve it. And you're like, no, that there will still be cultural considerations that need to happen. And if you put this in, then you're going to be angry at the technology when it was never that the technology wasn't doing what it was designed to do, or that solution. It's not an environment in which it can thrive. So I think starting with some of those other considerations are good entry points before jumping in.
How do you think they relate to their goals more often than not, right? I mean, there's usually an overarching goal that the institution is trying to achieve, and ed tech and solutions and all of those things that you just mentioned kind of all feed into that goal, right? They all play a part of that goal.
So I think some of it is really going, who are we as an institution, and what kind of experiences do we want our students to have? And that can take a variety of approaches. That can look a lot of different ways. And it can be, we want to be cutting edge and we want our students to have different kinds of learning experiences. It could be, we really need to have a great reporting structure in place, and I need something that addresses that. It could be, we are so diffuse in where we're set up that we need a means by which to pull information in. But balancing sort of, we might have institutional goals, but this will happen in an environment with people that are, more or less ready for that, but with students who end up experiencing it. And I think we leave the students off most of the time, where it's sort of the last minute piece, or it's the students that will experience and use it. And centering as our values about, if we have goals to really enhance our learning, we want students to learn. The hardest part should not be the tech, it should be the learning. So if the technology is getting in the way of our learning for our students, then we're not living up with our values as an institution in that space. So the more that we can say, do we know who our students are? Do we really understand their needs and how this fits and how they're going to experience this? And thinking about it not just one class at a time, which can lead to a student having 8 different logins to different solutions and, different places that they have to go depending on whose course they're in to get information about something, which is, less than ideal for experience that we want for our students. The better we'll be in aligning with our institutional goals. One of the things I think that was very clear coming out of the pandemic is we knew that we had technological divides, even within our faculty and staff, where we had assumed people could go be remote and then they would have access to technology at home. And that was sometimes the case, but not always consistently the case for our learners. So really going, if we value this as an institution, how are we setting up our students to be successful in that? Do we understand what needs they may have? And are we asking for things from our technological solutions to help our students? Whether that's we need different accommodations, whether that's I need ways to do this off Wi-Fi, whether that is I need different access points for students to come in, but making those requests on behalf of our students to ensure that we are getting the right solutions that will help our institution and our values because we're keeping our students at the center of that process.
Those are big rocks, right? I mean, those aren't easy. They're not easily none of those pieces are easily solvable because they're so intertwined, right? And they're large problems with certain parts of the student population or the faculty population, depending on, what kind of technology we're talking about. How does an institution, in your opinion, what do they need to do to kind of grasp onto those big rocks, right? And start to put into some sort of process into place that they can begin to look at slicing them into smaller, more achievable goals around technology?
Yeah, I think transparency is huge. Be clear on why we're making choices that we did for particular things. If I need to have where I need to be able to lock down a browser, I need students to do things in a very particular way. Be clear with our students about why we need it in that mechanism. That's a big missing piece in a lot of it is why am I being asked to do this? Why do I have to engage with these things? And we have our reasons, but we don't share those reasons with our constituents in meaningful ways. And also sometimes our faculty, if they get the told like, we're now an institution who's using this, and well, how did we end up there? And so being very transparent and clear in our communication on why we're doing this, what this is for, and why this matters and why we need to do this in our learning environment, I think is a great starting point. Another one is really thinking carefully about our policies. So oftentimes we start from a place of there's a few students that we know will game a system. So we will write policies trying to block a few students, or we'll build all of these things around that, which can cause it at the expense of our students that are trying to show and participate and do these things, but had no intention of engaging in some of these behaviors. And when we do that, it sends, I think, mixed signals about how much we trust our students and what our main considerations are in our policies as an institution. Academic integrity is important. Like I don't want to say, we throw that to the side, but if that's the only thing that we think about in our policies, then we do a disservice to the myriad of things that need to be considered in thinking about our students. So if it's, you have no choice as a student, and this is your only option, is you have to do things in this particular way. And if you're asking an alternative or it's raising stress for you to engage in it in this space, like, are we really getting at your learning, or are we creating out an environment where you showing me your learning is harder to get to? And I don't think we intend to do that, but really taking a look at our policies. And are we driving just with academic integrity, or academic integrity and all of these other pieces that relate to students, I think can be really helpful. The third thing I think I'll say, so transparency, get really clear, communicate, think about not just academic integrity in your policies, sort of B2, is make sure that we keep our focus on learning in this. And if the end goal in some of these are, I can pull learning data out, I want to see that it's, that it matters, that it's you and you're showing me that you're learning, but I've created such a situational environment where I can't even get to the learning. I'm now too stressed to show the learning, or I've given up trying to show the learning for whatever hoops I've had to jump through. Then we aren't getting good data to make choices about our effectiveness, our institution, and those spaces. And so if we can also keep our conversations focused on, is this aiding learning? What does this do for learning in our dialogues as an institution? Then I think we can start to pick away at some of these big chunks of things that can get in the way.
You're so right. There's such an opportunity, I think, to put up the proper guardrails around these particular subjects, right? Because it's not a one size fits all for every institution, every teacher, every student, right? I mean, we're people, we're humans. There's adaptability that needs to happen, right? And there are some things that are non-negotiable, right? I mean, the old world way of entering an exam hall, right? And you had your number two pencils and no snacks, no water, like everybody was facing the same way. Somebody would, come up and down the aisles and look over your shoulder. Well, we just have new tools and ways to do that, right? That are more accommodating to students with, an environment that they're much more comfortable with, right? That they have the things that they need around them to be successful during a very long exam. But you still need those guardrails sometimes, and they can be flexible, right? Lockdown browser or not, proctoring or not, then proctoring can be live or, AI driven, right? So there's lots of flexibility. So to your point, I think it's establishing what it is that you're trying to accomplish, right? How can you do that in a friendly environment to all involved? And do you get what you need, which is ultimately ensuring that students have mastery of whatever it is that the coursework is, right? That's kind of the holy grail of everything coming together. And I think we get lost a lot of the times in the minutia of students are squawking about their privacy privacy being invaded, and faculty members are burdened with, trying to figure out ways to better, create exam environments. And it just becomes a lot of noise that gets entered into the conversation. So I like that you're parsing it out into 3 very digestible ways of approaching it.
Thanks. And I think too, to your great points on sort of navigating this space, and what that does is technology advances. And one of the things that's really hard with this is there's been experiences that people have had potentially negative with it, that they lock in as like, well, that's all that this can do, or that's all that this does. And I don't want to engage with that, or we need to find another way, and forgets that we learn this is like the worst it will be. It will get better and more adaptive. And so when it was things where students were taking exams, and if you look off to the side and you're thinking, it flags you, we can learn from that, and that can change. And so getting into that dialogue and realizing it's not necessarily about telling students you have to sit just like in your rooms, in your individual chairs, where you're going to show IDs and sit there and stare forward. And if you're looking off, they're watching you to see what you're looking off. You don't need to learn how to sit to do it. Technology in this way will adapt and advance as we go. It's being in communication with our technology providers on what we need. I need something that does this. I need a way to ensure that my students aren't kicked off if they lose internet connection, which was something we heard a lot during the pandemic. I need a way to talk about what happens to my files if part of it is recording my room. Like, what are my data privacy concerns related to that? And are there ways that you can opt in and opt out to pieces of it? And so we can, all of these things that we've heard and engaged in, we learn and we advance. But if we just sort of, I think, as institutions of higher education or administrators or faculty go, well, we had that experience and that's as good as it gets. It's like, no, that's the worst it will be. This is an opportunity to advance and to grow and to learn and be an active consumer and say, I want a solution that does this, this, and this. I want one that my students can sit in the following way. I need to be able to deal with different kind of backgrounds and parse my students in that way. I need them to be able to sneeze and it's fine. And they're like, okay, great. Thank you. We'll take that information and build on it. But unless we're in that dialogue with these tools, then we can't fault them for not doing something that we want or need it to do.
Well, and I think the pandemic unfairly put these tools in the spotlight to do things that they weren't meant to do at that particular point in time, right? Or the experience was still being shaped in order to really succeed and be successful. So I do think that as technology continues to evolve, as the learning process continues to evolve, whether it's online, in-person, hybrid, all of that flexibility that I think was a nice to have during the pandemic is now becoming kind of normal, right? I mean, there's plenty of opportunities for teachers to teach in the way they'd like to, the way students want to learn. There's all those additional resources that have came out of the pandemic that I think we would say that in some classrooms have really augmented the learning experience, right? So how does those technology tools settle, right? Everything has to settle over time to really kind of create this very awesome, inclusive environment for learning. I mean, there's lots of opportunity there for those tools to continue to participate in the proper way and not be a one size fits all for a solution like it was during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's exactly right. And I think there are great opportunities to engage in this and more equitably. Like if I'm a student and I was driving on my way to sit in a room for an exam, okay, and I get a flat tire, and then I'm missed. And if I had to pay to sit through that exam, and now I have to repay and engage in this, that's cost. But if I have the option, if that happens, to take it online, like that's a huge win for me. And that's incredibly beneficial. If I can't be there at a particular time that something is happening, but I can do that online in the comfort of my house, if that's where I want to do it, in a place where I don't feel like I don't want to go into the center and engage in that. I want to stay here and do this. And maybe that's in the middle of the night is when I have time to do it. I have that option and that opportunity to engage in. And that is a wonderful space for students to say, I don't have to fit my life around my education. My education can fit around my life. And I can engage when I'm ready. I can find the right combination of spaces that make sense for me to do that. And that can really be incredibly beneficial when that's part of sort of the choice and thinking about how is this being responsive to me and my needs and how this fits as a student. So I think there's wonderful opportunities to engage in all of this. We can also know much more about our students too, and how they're learning and where they're learning and what's working and what's not than we did before. And I find it fascinating, institutions that'll do the not get into interoperability conversations with technology. Like, can this data talk to that data? But we'll spend all this time sort of pulling something out from here and connecting it to student data to pull it into another system to get a picture. But we do have the space to say we can collect so much additional information to better understand and be responsive to our student needs. And that is a blessing and a curse, because then you're like, I have all this data. What do I do with all this data? But it can also just be, this is great. We have insights into things that we didn't on our students before. And let's talk with our students about which of these really matter and which of these are important, and how can interpret this to best be responsive. And that kind of way of thinking about communicating with our students or getting a glimpse into learning processes, we wouldn't have without these. So I think overall, there's huge opportunities to increase equity in this space. It's our intentional engagement with the tools to do that.
So that was fantastic, that answer. I love that. I would love to hear your opinion on, as institutions explore their technology solutions, what elements of choice should they really be considering during that process?
So I think some of it is, what are we ready for? Where are our faculty, staff, and students? What makes sense that's a good push forward for us, but not too much of a leap, so that we're going to run into problems in implementation or adoption, or we're going, oh, this will save us for the next 3 years for doing these things. So what are you ready for, and what makes sense? What's a good push, but not too far, is an important piece of that. Interoperability is another good one, I think, of how does this work with my other existing systems? Is this something that can fit in and integrate? Is this something that I need to have a workaround? Does this give me a missing piece in an important enough way that makes sense? So really thinking about, how does this fit within the other spaces that I have in engagement. Values alignment, I think, is another one. Does this align with what we care about as an institution? Are we sending signals that when we say something in our mission, or we say something about our student learning experience, that it's going to be reinforced by the technology that we're selecting, and not sort of raise an eyebrow or get a side eye question for it, but it's in alignment with what we really want from that. And then I think really keeping it focused on the learning and the student experience. Will this get in the way of learning, or will this help learning? And if it's going to help and advance and support student learning and give us better data on the learning, great. If this student experience comparable across it, wonderful. We don't want to get into any harm causing, and anything that we do in institutions, we don't want to be like, oh, we've adopted a process and approach, and then not the thing that we expected. So getting into keeping it learning focused and thinking about the student experience, I think is great. And then the last thing I would say with it in considerations is it authentic for how those learning processes, experiences, and pieces go? Are we getting, can we trust what's coming out of it? Or are we creating sort of a environment that makes it work for this, or students have to fit into a way? And now it's a different, we got to look at that information differently and make choices about it. So I think authenticity of our ability to implement and integrate, whether that's assessment or otherwise, are all really important to consider.
Who do you think, in your opinion, needs to be part of this process at the institution to really have kind of all departments, folks, focuses all kind of included in that process? Because it's really not just up to a department chair to say, hey, we want this, or a faculty member to raise their hand and say, I need this particular tool in my course to be successful. It may start that way, but there's certainly synergies that can happen across campus. So who, in your opinion, needs to be part of kind of that steering committee when adopting ed tech?
Yeah, I would say the more the merrier, but be careful. So, I'll say maybe, it depends. So I think there's different ways that people can be involved. So the broader you can go to collect information, opinions, perceptions, great. On that particular steering committee, I think keeping it to an institutional data person, whether that's institutional research, institutional effectiveness, or someone that has a larger data view across, that can go, oh, okay, we have things here and here's how this fits, but can really keep it from a data perspective. It's wonderful. We get to them at the end and we're like, look what we've done. And they're like, what? We had two things that over here, or now how does that interface with our surveys that go out at this time? And so getting them on early and keeping them there as part of the conversation, I think is very important. I would say someone from student affairs is key. And depending on what you're looking at, I think it depends on who you want, whether it's advising and not too high. You don't want to get to like, it's the vice president level. Is you want some people that understand and have integration and experience from front time with students. And so that could be, again, depending on the technology solution that you're looking at and what it's serving and its purpose, it will depend. But someone from that student support side of things is important to have there, because the students will come to them and ask questions. There will be that piece. And so are they prepared? Students are another one. Now, this is again to say, do you want them on a steering committee, or do you want to get information from them? Do you want to do a focus group? Do you want to send out a survey? Do you want to have people ask in class their experience or whatever that might be? But some way to get some input from the students. And then, of course, administration. And depending on what you're doing, I think depends on that administrative leadership on at what level that do you want it. But you need people that understand what it's really going to take to implement this and do it well, what that timeline looks like, what kind of release time people need, what professional development support will go alongside that. Because if this is a change to how I'm engaging, if it's a change to my teaching, we need to center our teaching and learning folks in that conversation and engage. But if I don't have an administrator who gets that big picture and it's like, all right, we've adopted this, so now we just do it, but really understands that developmental on-ramp for us to engage with the technology, we're going to run into problems on the budget side, as well as the expectations of when we can really get something moving.
Well, and it affects the outcome too, right? I mean, you may not get to the desired outcome in the path that you thought, right? And so if you have a myriad of people that are involved, there's certainly additional learnings that probably will bubble up, and that could be part of the success story of that piece of technology being inserted, implemented, and successfully, utilized to the goal, right, of the institution. So super important, I think, to have those right people as part of the conversation. Kind of taking it down maybe a level to, faculty and students are really the folks that are going to end up using those ed tech tools, right? Whether they're in line with the institution's goals for a particular path that they've set upon, or whatever the scenario is for adoption of those EdTech tools. What do you think faculty need to consider to ensure that students have a positive online assessment experience? Because there's, being in the role that we are here at Inspira, we're all about that digital assessment ecosystem. So I'd be curious on what your thoughts are from a faculty perspective on what they should be considering when adopting a digital assessment tool.
Yeah, I think how does this integrate with the environment I've created in my class? So does this align well with the policy statements that I have, how I talk about this in the syllabus, how I prepare and set students up for it? So if I have been going along and saying, we're doing all of these things, it's important for the following reasons, you have these real world applications, we've had other opportunities for authentic assessments and a myriad of ways to show your learning, but you were going to, at the end of this, sit for a professional licensure exam. And you have to be able to sit and take these tests and exams. And so it's important that we practice that and engage in it. And so now we're going to do that. We're going to do this here. That is a very different entry point set up for success for students than if, you come into my class and I'm going, I don't trust you and I need to see if you've done this. And so you're going to have to sit in front of these things because I need to monitor you because I don't believe that it's you doing this work. That environment of how we introduce this technology, how we set our students up to engage with it, and how we believe to be in community with our students as faculty can really make or break the learner experience with it, and then can temper if something does go wrong, or depending on what the technology is, how students perceive that experience. So if I come in from sort of scenario one, where I'm like, this is important, we need to practice this, this is a skill you'll do, you'll have these other opportunities, here's why we're engaging with it, best of luck, you know how to do this, we've been preparing you all along, engage in these exams, and something doesn't quite work well for me as a student in that exam, I'm going to have a much more positive overall experience in doing that than if it's already a gotcha for the experience for students, or one where it's, I'm an adult that's not to be trusted. I haven't joined into my disciplinary community experience. And so I think there's so much opportunity for faculty to make or break students' engagement with technology, but I don't think we talk about it enough or think about how we introduce it, all the things that we set around our classroom environment, whether it's online or in person, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, to set the tone for our expectations around learning and the choices that we made in our technology around it. The last thing I'll say on that is it can't also just be a faculty member on their own. So if you're the lucky one that gets my class in a program, let's say, and I put videos up talking about the assignments that we're doing, along the way, I'm sending notes to people, and then we get to our exam and I'm telling you about this wonderful experience. And then the next class that you have is the complete opposite experience from that, of someone being like, well, we were told we have to implement it this way, so everyone has to sit for this. Students experience this as an institution and as a program. And it needs to be something we collectively decide as a faculty, as a department, where this fits in our program, how this fits into our teaching, and what we're going to do together to ensure that our students don't have that misaligned experience with it, but have a consistently positive one across the board. So there's things we do in our class to help set it up. We need to be mindful of how we're envisioning that, but then it's also, how do my students experience this across the program, and are we all on the same page and sending that same message? It's very important.
Super important. I would even add that if you can include that digital testing environment or digital assessment environment in all types of assessment, right? Whether they be quizzes or tests or portfolio work or however you define that mastery, right? At the end of the day, if it's in the same form, the same delivery, the same format, to your point, right? Everybody becomes much more comfortable. It becomes just a normal part of that process at that institution. And so you don't have that disparity in experience, right? Because you've adopted it holistically, you're delivering it holistically, and it really becomes another tool for students to feel comfortable with and excel at, right? And then so it's less about the vehicle and more about what their knowledge is. So to your point, I think it's super interesting and super important. As EdTech tools are starting to be implemented on campus or within an institution, what do you think needs to be reviewed as possible synergies and adjacencies to strengthen or bolster that particular tool being successful within the campus environment?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. And some of it depends on what the back experience has been with technology, how this fits in, and how people are feeling about it. So before we can really implement and I think move something forward and be successful in that, we have to sort of figure out where are people, what are their preconceived notions or conceptions, what are the past experiences they've had that impact their interest or willingness to engage, and really sit with and deal with that as an institution. Are we getting people ready to honor the past that may have happened with whatever technology it may have been, or whatever past implementation of a technology that went horribly wrong, that everyone has sort of some story about along the way, and talk about how is this going to be different? How does this help us? What's sort of our elevator pitch? Like, here's the problem, here's how this is going to help us. Here's how this is different from last time, because I know you're thinking this. And here's what we're going to do to really ensure that it's successful. And here's how this fits with something that I've been hearing from this community that we need and want to do. And so this isn't a done to you, but a done with. And it's going to help us in the following mechanisms. And I think that is incredibly needed to get this going. Also, level setting expectations. The amount of times that I've heard institutions, and this is also very, I think, prevalent in assessment, that are like, this will fix everything. Like, once we implement this, we won't have any problems on the following piece. And that's just not the case, whether that's not what this technology does, that's, not what the solution engages in, or you don't even have the processes in place to get the data you need for this technology to be successful at instances. And so there's actually a lot of on the ground pre-work that needs to be built and engage. So level setting expectations, and that needs to come from the institution. Someone in the institution who's been part of these conversations is, we want to set this up for success as a partnership with our technology solution providers. I don't want this to be a failure, because we told everyone that it, we'll be able to spin the world backwards. And that's just not the case. And so I think being very clear about that and making sure that everyone's on the same page and understands and what this is, how this helps us, what it can and cannot do, then we are in a better position to move forward and be successful.
So, I love that, right? Because I think because somebody brings an ed tech tool to the table, that is a automatic response that is going to solve a bunch of problems, right? And part of that could be that a lot of the tools available on campus today are kind of workhorse tools, right? That have a wide berth around where they play in that student learning or faculty student relationship and learning process, right? So it's interesting because there's so many solutions out there that really are built for a particular purpose with a particular expertise attached to them, and have truly deliverables that can help be part of the puzzle, right? It's not a one solution fit all and do all. And I think during the pandemic, there were some of those tools that had kind of outlining pieces of software that could add to the experience or to augment the experience. And it was easy and natural because you already had those on campus to access them and implement them. But that didn't mean that they were the best solution for whatever it is that you're trying to solve for with that particular piece of tech, right? So I think we're kind of on I won't say a precipice, because I think we're definitely a little over the hump, but there are tools out there that provide experiences, solutions that are very specific. So I think you really have to evaluate your tech, your overall tech portfolio, and say, are you getting what you need out of what you currently have on campus or within the institution? And are there other providers that, once plugged in, to your point with integration, right, that can work together to provide even a better experience than what's happening today? But it is all about expectations. You're absolutely right.
But I think it's also about willingness to change too. So one of the things that I find incredibly frustrating about institutions of higher education is they're sort of, we are a whatever school, insert X here for technology, and we've been that for 8 years, and we're just going to suffer through when it doesn't do the following things that we want it to do. They're just going to sit with it and create these incredibly labor-intensive workarounds to do things when you could actually just change to a tool or change to a different provider that does that. And I understand there's a variety of reasons why that's the case, but I think seeing themselves more as technology consumers of this, as a driver of the market, and really positioning themselves to say, if this isn't meeting our needs across our portfolio of tech, then we need to change, and we need to keep a regular review process, like we have program review and like we have all of these other things that we review. Is this doing what we need? What's going on in the field right now? Because again, it advances very quickly. You look at the things that are going on with generative AI right now, and you're like, you can't write a policy. Wrap your hands on this because it's moving too fast. But we don't have mechanisms of our review in place for institutions of, is our portfolio of technology really connecting in meaningful ways to where we need to be? Is it doing what we want? And if not, we need to change. And what is our plan to do that in the next 2 to 3 years? And if we're building out 5-year tech plans, that's too long, like, for some of these spaces. And so thinking about our internal processes and practices of, do we have what we need? Is this working? Where do we need to review it? And being comfortable to change, because we're not just an institution of a particular thing, but being willing to say, this isn't meeting our needs. Our learning and our students and our staff are more important. We're gonna move in the following directions. Is something we should be more comfortable with, I'll say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This has been absolutely lovely. You're a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for taking the time to share that with us today. And I love that you brought together that philosophy angle with you, because I do think it's important to be curious about those questions and how you can make things better within the learning experience. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat.
Inspire has over 20 years of experience in the digital assessment solution space, providing institutions with a platform that supports the entire examination cycle. And it revolutionizes the exam experience while providing an easy-to-use interface, allowing students to demonstrate their understanding of a course's subject matter, which ultimately fuels the digital learning process. The views expressed by the participants in this podcast are their personal opinions and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Inspire. Inspire disclaims any responsibility or liability for any statements made in the podcast by the participants.